Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk with Heather Dominick about being highly sensitive and what does that mean in business. You know, there's a lot more people getting into entrepreneurship and they come with different personality types. You know, that driver, outgoing, effervescent personality type tends to gravitate towards business, owning their own business, and being in the limelight, being in sales. But we're seeing there's so many more people that are more, as Heather calls, highly sensitive getting into business. And how do they manage and how do they become successful? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, have some fun. Heather, welcome to Leaders of Transformation.
Thank you. I am so looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Me too. And shout out to Interview Connections for sending me another great guest, Heather. They send me amazing guests. I am so grateful for the booking agents that send me all the guest requests, and then I get to pick and choose through that. And it's
They're
really
very good at what they do.
Yeah. Nathan, there's a whole bunch of them over there. I'm not going to mention everybody because I'll leave somebody out, and I don't want to do that. But interviewconnections.com, if you're interested in getting on more great podcasts, you can reach out to them. They can help you with that. Also, I want to thank our listeners and our viewers, if you're watching on video, for being here as well, because you're the reason why we do this podcast. We do this podcast because we want to inspire you. We want to equip you so that you can be the difference maker and the world changer that you're capable of being. I believe that every single person has a unique gift, a unique talent, and oftentimes that little voice in our head says, oh, no, not you, everybody else, or these people, but not you. And we want you to know that, yes, you do have value and you have a message to share. And so we would love to have you share it, because I think that when we all do that, the world is just, a much better place. So with that in mind, we'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. You can find us on social media and share with us what you're up to. Also, afterwards, if you like this interview, please leave us a rating and review. It really helps us to get a wider reach around the world. Literally, we have listeners in over 120 countries, and we want to continue to extend that out to encourage the people that are looking to make a difference in the world. So we appreciate your help with that. All right, so Heather, let's talk about this idea of being highly sensitive. How did you find out and discover that you're highly sensitive?
Yes. Well, how I discovered, I think probably first important piece of contextual information is that I am heading into my 16th year of being self-employed. And with that in mind, about 10 years ago, I had brought my business across the $1 million mark for the first time. And I would love to say that it was an amazing celebratory experience, but it was not that at all. And instead, I found myself in a massive place of overwhelm and overwork and overexhaustion. And I made a decision to just really withdraw from everything that I was doing, except continuing to really pour my love into the clients that I was serving at the time. And I went into a place of very deep inquiry, really questioning if this is what I was meant to do and if this is what it means to be self-employed. I'm not so sure this is for me. And that deep inquiry led me to Dr. Elaine Aron. And Dr. Aron is the founding psychologist and researcher on the highly sensitive person. And when I discovered Dr. Aron and connected with her at that time, I had never even heard the phrase highly sensitive. And once I understood what it meant, it didn't surprise me so much that I was highly sensitive, but what surprised me was how highly sensitive I was. So just to briefly say that through Dr. Aron's work, what it means to be highly sensitive is, first of all, this is something that you are born into the world with. It's biological. And what it defines is how your nervous system is wired. And for those of us who are highly sensitive, our nervous system is wired to take in stimulation at a much higher degree than someone who is not highly sensitive. So that stimulation can be anything from sight, smell, sound, touch, energy, information, you name it. And understanding that I was highly sensitive at that point literally changed everything about who I am, how I operate in my day-to-day life, and definitely that includes how it is that I operate in my business. And it really was the seedling beginning of what has become the highly sensitive entrepreneur movement.
Awesome. Yeah, and I jumped right in and didn't even do much of a bio on you. I know you talk about A Course in Business Miracles, and you've got, some amazing things that you're doing. Just to go back to that business, congratulations on building a 7-figure business. And, and you're just like, wow, I didn't even realize, some of the things and aspects about yourself. And I think there's a lesson in that sometimes we think we need to figure things out, have everything worked out before we get going. But you find these things along the way. So don't wait until you have all your ducks in order and, I need to take that next personal development course. I need to do this program here. No, just get in, do what you do, and you'll learn those things along the way. And then you can apply them in the areas that you're already in. So that business that you had, what kind of business was it?
Well, I had started my first business as a nutrition and wellness coach. And through that business, I had begun to apply my spiritual practice to the practice and art of being in business. And that really led me to share more of those spiritual approaches to marketing and selling. And so at that point, I was supporting other entrepreneurs with a spiritual approach to being in business. And then everything shifted, and now there is the focus of serving highly sensitive entrepreneurs through A Course in Business Miracles.
Now, there is definitely a spiritual aspect to this as well.
Absolutely.
A Course in Business Miracles, of course, sounds a lot like A Course in Miracles. Marianne Williamson, a very well-known spiritual teacher, talks about that. Can you describe the correlation between that and how you're applying that to business?
Yes, absolutely. So A Course in Miracles is a spiritual and psychological curriculum. And I have been a student of the course since I was about 15 as a result of my mother passing away when I was 14 years old, and being given Return to Love, written by Marianne Williamson, who you've mentioned, which really led me into a deeper study of the course. And off and on through my teenage years for sure, and then kind of desperately clinging to it through my tumultuous 20s, and definitely then really turning to the course as part of beginning the journey of being self-employed. So when I discovered that I was highly sensitive, I really made the connection between being highly sensitive in business as a highly sensitive entrepreneur and the course, because according to A Course in Miracles, the definition of a miracle is a shift in perception. And as I learned more and more about what it meant to be highly sensitive, I thought to myself, that is absolutely what's needed in order for a highly sensitive to be able to be successfully self-employed. There has to be a shift in perception. You have to be willing to look at yourself differently in regards to what it means to be highly sensitive. You have to be willing to look at being in business differently and be willing to go through the process of designing it for you and who you are. And that includes how you operate in the business, to be willing to see that and do that differently, everything from marketing to selling to all aspects of operations. And that is absolutely what I have done. So I am, proud to continue to be a 7-figure business owner, but much more peacefully and much more happily. And I will also add a much higher net profit as a result, and then also to really be able to turn around and teach that to so many other highly sensitives around the world who desire to be self-employed and are self-employed and really need to be doing it in a different way. They need to be going through a retraining to experience that shift in perception. And that is the birth of A Course in Business Miracles.
Nice. Well, so you coach, I know you've won awards in coaching, and had this Course in Business Miracles program has been very successful. You have been acknowledged and featured in many different arenas. Are you coaching one-on-one with these entrepreneurs, or are you doing them in group programs? Like, so give us an idea on what would you do. Somebody says, okay, I'm highly sensitive. I know later on, by the way, for our listeners and viewers, Heather's going to give away a free gift for you, which is a quiz. So you can find out if you are actually highly sensitive. But that being said, let's say you discover that you're highly sensitive. What do you do with them?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I've definitely developed and continue to develop a great body of work in order to be able to create trainings, teachings, tools for highly sensitive entrepreneurs. And I draw from areas of psychology, psychotherapy, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, coaching, spirituality, and to really support the creation of those trainings, teachings, and tools. And through my research and my work, I've really come to understand that there's 3 primary elements that really contribute to a highly sensitive entrepreneur's success. And that is community, core practice, and consistency. So all elements of Business Miracles mentoring programs revolve around those 3 aspects. So we work within mentoring programs, which allows us to have access to the Business Miracles community of HSEs. And what really works there is there's a great power for HSEs to be in aligned community. And part of that is because most of us who are highly sensitive, we have the experience of constantly feeling like the odd one out, that there's something wrong with us, that we're different, we have to hide who we are in order to be able to fit in. So to be able to be in a community where suddenly you are really not only seen and heard, but celebrated for who you are, there's a real buoyancy of energy and support that occurs, but also there's a real sense of safety. And for us highly sensitives, we also tend to have the past experience of feeling very unsafe. Unsafe in a lot of different group settings and just unsafe in the world in general. So to have this learning environment where there is a sense of safety, where again, you can be seen, heard, and celebrated, then it's a beautiful place to practice. And that is where core practice and consistency come in, to really be able to practice what is needed to then be able to go out into the world where, again, highly sensitives were only 20% of the population. So to be able to go out in the world with that sense of confidence that's really needed in order to be able, to, really succeed as a highly sensitive entrepreneur. So to have that core practice and that consistency within community is imperative. So the mentoring programs, again, all have those elements, and then you can choose if you choose to work primarily only through community, or if you would like to add private support as well. And you can do that through members of my coach team who are trained by me specifically, or with myself. It just depends on what level of support you would like to avail yourself to.
Got it. Thank you. Well, so let's dive a little bit further into the highly sensitive person. Now, this is not, there are some people that might be listening and going, oh, I'm highly sensitive, but it's actually not being highly sensitive. It's being dramatic.
Yeah, right? Overly sensitive. I like
overly sensitive. Yeah. Or, emotional. I actually never saw myself as being highly sensitive, and until somebody I was dating apparently had said, oh yeah, when I first got to, first getting to know you, he knew my brother. And he said, I asked your brother what you were like, and he said that you were really emotional. And I'm like, I'm not emotional. What are you talking about? And do I look emotional? But what he was referring to is, yeah, I am sensitive in certain things. And I actually have related to that term, being empathic, where I'm receiving a lot. And so I need that time, that space, my own alone time, to kind of cleanse and clear my energy before I can go back in. If I'm with people and in those environments, I will pick up what's going on around me, and it'll start to wear me down after a while. So can you talk a little bit about the distinction, what you're talking about here? This is not an excuse to say, oh, I'm just sensitive, and that's more what's happening is it's more touchy versus,
For sure. Well, there's definitely crossovers in regards to characteristics, but what's really important to remember is that the research goes back to Dr. Aaron, and what she has determined in regards to being highly sensitive is biological. So it absolutely has emotional impacts, but really when you come down to the essence, it is how your nervous system interprets stimulation. Now, the key from there is, have we been taught how to utilize that nervous system in a way that really works for us? And most highly sensitives have not. And that makes sense because, again, there's 20% of us who are highly sensitive. So the world is primarily designed for the other 80%. So what has happened and what I've identified in my work is what I refer to as 12 top HSE shadows and then 12 top HSE strengths. So the shadows, and some of those shadows are definitely overwhelm is an HSE shadow, over responsibility is an HSE shadow, over protection is an HSE shadow, difficulties with digestion or overall health problems is an HSE shadow. And that shadow behavior stems from not really understanding how to work with your nervous system. So just developing ways to try to cope with it, which tend to then, from a socialized perspective, come across as being like overly emotional, right? Or kind of weird or strange or different. And yet, when you really learn how to work with your nervous system and hone it, then you can really shift into strengths. And those strengths, for example, some of the top 12 are that we are very intuitive as HSEs. We are very empathic. We have the absolute ability to be deep thinkers, deep listeners, deep feelers. So then it becomes about, okay, how do I manage my system so that I am operating in my business from a strength perspective? And what outer systems do I need to put in place so that I am consistently operating from that strength perspective and not getting like thrown over to the shadow side? And those outer systems are everything from, boundaries in regards to relationships, the way that you set up your schedule, how you go about being productive in your day, how you approach marketing, selling, etc. And then that helps with that differentiation, and one for yourself to know, like, yes, this is who I am as a highly sensitive, and this is how I choose to operate in my business, in my life. And then you don't kind of flip-flop over into that overly sensitive, unaware, unconscious, a little messy area, which is not helpful to anyone, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I often will say, because in teaching personalities, is that every strength taken to an extreme becomes a weakness. That
Right.
sensitivity now taken to an extreme becomes, as you describe, a shadow of that, and that doesn't work. Now, for the entrepreneurs that you work with, is there I'm just curious if there are certain vocations, certain business arenas that they tend to gravitate to certain things, maybe artistic or creatives or whatever. Is there a correlation to that, or do you find that you have all?
Well,
Yeah.
It's so interesting. When I first started out, it was, primarily like coaches, consultants, creatives, and yet the work has really expanded. So we have, all types of businesses represented in the Business Miracles community, dentists, speakers, singers, actors, equine experts, artists, authors, I mean, really, insurance brokers, real estate brokers, more traditional, what you think of as more traditional businesses. However, there is one absolutely unifying quality for sure. It is service-based. So you don't tend to find a highly sensitive who's like, let me design the latest widget and never interact with people and, just sell millions of them. That's not the typical. And why? Because according to Dr. Erin and her work, she refers to highly sensitives as the royal advisors to the world. That's why we've been brought here. So we are natural teachers, coaches, good lawyers, librarians, researchers. We are here to be able to provide that service. It happens very naturally to us. We use that empathy that you were speaking about earlier, where we can, be with a client and we can just really just intuitively understand what it is that they need. One of our other HSE strengths is that we are excellent with language. So we can also then pretty usually, typically verbalize what it is that they need. Be able to put in place, what they have to experience to go from the pain that they're currently in to the solution that they're looking for. All of that comes very naturally to us. That is all when we are in our strengths. And then the work that I do is how do you take those strengths and then apply them to, again, those more systematized operation aspects of the business that are also needed. So answer to your question, yes and no. Yes, service-based, and that can really show up in an array of arenas for sure.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
This is so interesting. Really, really interesting. And so let's talk about, because I'm thinking about myself, right? I'm going, oh, where am I on that, spectrum, and how much of what I do and how I operate is adapted, right? Because I got into business and I had to survive in business in a man's world, and I've been in business for over 30 years. And so at that time when I first started, I was like, okay, well, I need to adapt here. This is not working the way that I started out. So doing that, I don't know. It's just interesting. I'd love to take that quiz. Let's talk about selling.
Yes.
How do HSCs sell differently?
Yes. Well, it's so interesting because exactly what you just shared in terms of that process of adapting, right? So let me just speak to that for a little bit because through my work, I've identified what I refer to as 3 primary HSE coping mechanisms. So most of us who are highly sensitive, again, we're not really taught how to utilize our highly sensitive nature so that it could really be a strength for us. And so we kind of just cobbled together our ability to try to just cope in a world that's not designed for us. So there's the HSE coping mechanism of pushing, and I will definitely out myself as a recovering pusher. That is what got me across that $1 million mark for the first time. And so, right, I like to say, like, a pusher will get done what another 80%er will get done, but it will come at a high cost. It'll come at a high cost and a massive expenditure of energy, and it will often show up in health or relationship types of crisis. You have the coping mechanism of hiding, and the HSE who's a hider, typically how that shows up in the business is they have like the most beautiful website. They have really well thought out programs. They have gorgeous marketing materials. And at the end of the day, they're making little to no money. in their business. And then you have the combo platter coping mechanism, which is where you flip flop back and forth between the two. So I like to say that to be an HSE, we need to learn how to go beyond coping with our highly sensitive nature and into creating. So adaptation is part of being able to cope. And then we want to shift from the ability to adapt into our HSE strength of creativity, because we are extremely creative as highly sensitives. And that is exactly the path that I walked to create the HSE selling success system. So very much like yourself, when I first started off in business, first of all, I came from working as a traditional high school teacher. So I knew nothing about business. And I just went to trainings and I took classes and courses about like how to have a selling conversation. I even studied with Zig Ziglar, like when I first started out, and you kind of can't get more old school than that. And so I took everything I was learning and I kept trying to use it, and it wasn't working. I was not converting. So without knowing it, because I didn't know that I was highly sensitive at the time, I went into my creative mode and thought, okay, which parts of this are working and what do I need to kind of shift and change so it's more of a match for my personality. And that was really the beginning of what is now, the system that I've taught to just HSEs, thousands around the world, taking the elements of what's needed to support another person to make a decision, guiding them through the decision-making process, but from an HSE strength perspective versus kind of more the 80% or traditional approach of like, close them as fast as you can, get them really scared, totally like drill into their pain, all the things that will make a highly sensitive like freak out themselves and then totally not be able to enroll the client. So those are some of the elements of, again, shifting from more of like that pressure sale approach into what is needed to guide a person through decisions. Again, we're royal advisors. We're super good at it. We just need that specific type of process and structure to be able to follow that helps us be able to channel those strengths.
So as I'm hearing you say that, I'm remembering back to in the beginning, when I learned how to sell, or I was reading books at least and doing what you did, although I love Zig. I always love Zig. I just love listening to him. He's just amazing. And I took some programs with him and in person, and he's such a great heart. Yeah. That being said, so some of these things like the Tom Hopkins approach and all of this, the when they say this, you say that, and they say this, and I've used this now in teaching people how to sell. And, it's so funny because like those things, I was like, okay, so I remember having this day where I scheduled these sales calls that I was going to make. And so I had this script. I'm like, okay, I'm ready now. I got my script out. And here the problem was very quickly, as I realized, is my prospects didn't follow the script. It completely went off script. And I'm like, wait a second, you're not supposed to say that. Well, that's nowhere on my script.
Right.
And so immediately I was like, this script doesn't work. This doesn't help me, right? I got my little flow chart. They say, I'm supposed to follow it through. And at the end, they're supposed to say, yes, I'd just love to meet with you. Yeah. Didn't work for me. So I put that aside and said, okay, let's just have a conversation and see. And so out of survival, adaptation, whatever, I just was like, okay, I just need to figure out, now I'm stuck. I'm on the phone with this person. How do I manage through this? So I just stopped and listened to what they were saying. And I was asking questions because I didn't know what to say.
Right.
There was no script. And so I was just like, listen, I just listened to them. And that worked. And then I started to realize like, wow, we just ask questions. They're going to tell me what's going on. They're going to tell me how to quote unquote close them. They're going to tell me, and then I'm not going to have to close them. And that's where I had a whole different style of selling. And many years later, I had somebody who said, fairly new in business, and they were saying, oh, we're moving to relationship marketing. And I'm thinking, it's always been relationship marketing. I have news for you. That's always worked. And it worked really well for me. And so when I would hear these sales techniques and the double tie down close, and I don't know all of that stuff. I don't subscribe to any of that because it never worked for me. And so I would just listen and find out, okay, what do they need? And do I have something that I can offer them that will solve their problem? Great. And if I don't, then I go and refer them to someone else. Right. But either way, we're going to figure out what it is they're looking for, and they're going to gain clarity as a result of that regardless. So as I said, I'm hearing this, and I'm like, oh yeah. And I remember when you talked about the hiding. So I've never been a hider. However, when I went through a very difficult season in my marriage, when I had a successful business, and then all of this started to implode personally, and I was like, what do I do with this? It was not the way I thought it was going to go. And so then I started to step back. I stopped going out and speaking on stages. I didn't feel like I could go out and market myself. And people said, you need to go out there, you need to get yourself out there. I just couldn't do it at that time because I was processing. There was an imposter syndrome kind of kicking in there where I thought, wow, if I can't sort out the stuff at home, how can I possibly think that I'm helping other people or able to help other people, which is not true. It's not that I wasn't capable. I was already doing it, but somehow I second guessed myself. But the biggest thing was I didn't want to be visible. I just needed to process my own stuff. And so I noticed that coping mechanism kick in, what you described there is hiding, and then notice the impact, of course, in my business. But then when I could get out of that and take a rest and come back to it, not only did I have all the learning, because I'm also very analytical, and when you talked about reflective, I process through things a lot, so I can learn as much as possible from it. But then I can come back and I can come back with that strength. So in that creative mode. So what you're saying is resonating so very well. And hopefully for our listeners too, that it's resonating with some, maybe it's themselves, or maybe they know someone, they go, oh, that makes sense now.
Yes.
Why they respond the way they do. And I see in some of my clients, because I work a lot with service-based entrepreneurs as well, interestingly enough, how I attract service-based entrepreneurs, right? And not manufacturing or, whatever. But yeah, this is really, really interesting. So,
I love
the first, go ahead.
I was going to say, I love hearing the parts that are resonating for you. And as you were talking about like your process of learning selling for yourself, I was having kind of flashes of me sitting back at my kitchen table in my studio apartment in Greenwich Village where I first started out, because I was literally doing the exact same thing that you're describing, looking at the script and being like, wait. And then just going into listening. And again, back to that HSE strength of deep listening. So you might need to take the quiz. Yeah. And then, also the coping mechanism of hiding, from your description, one, I would say that was, a bit beyond the coping mechanism of hiding, because you recognize that you needed that space for regrouping and recovering and processing through, a very, as you said, tumultuous transition for yourself personally, versus those who are in the coping mechanism of hiding. They don't necessarily have the awareness that it sounds like you had at that time. And it tends to be more of an ongoing, just default behavior versus like an isolated time during, an extreme life transition. And so that awareness and that consciousness is such a key piece to the coping mechanisms. And I teach also what I refer to as the HSE coping cycle. Whether you're a pusher, a hider, or a combo platter, we get caught in the cycle. And then I teach, what are the ways that we want to what are the steps we want to take in order to get out of the cycle so that we're not living our life constantly caught in this cycle. And awareness is that first step, which again, it really sounds like you had at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is great. So the first thing that people do is they take the quiz, and then from there you have your course. And the course isn't teaching them how to do business, as I understand it. It's actually how to function as a highly sensitive entrepreneur. Or do you get into business techniques as well?
No, we definitely get into business techniques. I really say that being an HSE is an inner and outer approach. So the inner is that aspect of what you just spoke to of first just understanding, right? For many, like, what does this actually mean to be highly sensitive, and now go through a retraining so that I can utilize this aspect of myself in a strength-based way. And then the outer piece is, how does that now translate to, again, more of those outer systems, such as the marketing, the selling, and the operation. So we do, go through all of it. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's so specific, and it caters to a specific audience. And I can see how people would resonate with it, or they don't. It's either one or the other, and that's yeah.
You're highly sensitive or you're not. That's
You're
for
not.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even the intuition, what you talked about, is because that was something that I've always had, but I kind of I wouldn't say discounted it. I just didn't pay attention to it or develop it.
Right.
So it was just this thing that I had, and then later on realized, yeah, I guess I am, never really thought about it that way. And then once I became aware of it, like you talked about, once I became aware of it, then I could develop it.
Yes.
So that, because somebody might be listening and they have a successful business, or saying, I'm an HSE, I've adapted and so forth. Why would I need this? Right. And I'm thinking, well, actually, what's interesting is there are skills that if you can use these strengths to your advantage, and you're going to have so much more fun. Like, I have so much more fun bringing that intuition in, and even the spirituality and so forth, to actually bring those things in to my practice. I'm way more effective than I ever was before. And I always did well before, but this just takes it to another level. And
that's right.
Recently, some of even the podcasts I've been interviewing on as a guest on other podcasts have been so much better than even previous ones, where I was kind of more in my head. Whereas here I'm, kind of operating from an intuition standpoint of I'm just flowing. It's just like, man, that's great. And that's not being arrogant. That's just like, wow, it's almost like channeling it, and it's amazing when you can tap into that. And I noticed the difference. It's the difference between good and great.
Yes. So well said. Absolutely. Yeah. What I hear you describing is what I refer to as a category C HSE, which is the HSE who has created a very successful business. They're at a very, a healthy financial level. Yet they just discover that they're highly sensitive, and suddenly then can have access to that greater ease that you're really speaking to. And one of my clients and community members comes to mind, who is a very successful dentist in Texas, 7-figure business, team, really unique approach. People fly in to, receive her skill. And yet once she discovered that she was highly sensitive, and through our mentoring, started to apply this aspect to the practice, then she was really able to shift things so that the team, first of all, was just operating in a much more effective and efficient way, as well as much more ease-filled, which then freed her up to then be able to work on some of these bigger visionary projects that she has, which are, really about impacting health on a greater scale, for the entire country. And that is also one of our HSE strengths, which is we are very visionary. So if you can set things up where you can be in that flow that you're describing, if you've already brought your business to a successful place, utilizing what you understand about yourself as a highly sensitive can just really take you to an entirely higher level of being able to actualize most likely the visions that you have without getting so, bogged down by the nitty gritties, the details, or the coping mechanism or what have you. So for sure. Yeah, it's so much more fun. I mean, oh my gosh, like being in my business feels like 1,000 times different than 10 years ago. It's like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can feel that. Yeah. It's so much more effortless, the ease and grace of it.
Yes.
One thing that you brought up there, you mentioned about the dentist, and it was a female, and it made me think, oh, I should ask this question. Is it the 20% of the population, is it largely women, or is it evenly between men and women?
I can't speak to whether evenly. I will say Dr. Aaron's work says that it's not gender based. So my experience though is that, it's a hurdle even for women to come to a place where they can embrace their sensitivity and really see it as a strength rather than a weakness, a detriment, or a little dirty secret that they have to hide. And because of the socialized nature, of our culture, which, is pretty much worldwide these days, that's an even greater hurdle for men to have to overcome. So it tends to be more women who are attracted to the work that we do, through A Course in Business Miracles. Yet, I know those men are out there.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I can imagine it would be very difficult as a man, could be very difficult as a man to own up to, to really even just acknowledge and say, yeah, that's me. Because it's no, real men don't cry the whole thing, right? Real men don't, show weakness and whatever. So yeah, interesting. I was thinking, you probably have a lot more women than men, but the men must be out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. And again, I don't think it has anything to do with the biological. It's just more of the social aspect of what we tell ourselves being sensitive means, because again, it's a hurdle for women to overcome. Yes. But once they do, they enter into that ease, that flow, that grace that we're talking about, which is available to men as well. But the social hurdle is much higher.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is great. So businessmiracles.com is the website where people can go and find out more about your work and how they can take advantage of that. The free gift. So talk to us about that quiz that we've been alluding to. That I probably need to take.
Great. I know. I cannot wait to hear. So first of all, it's really an assessment, not so much a quiz. You don't pass or fail. But when you take the assessment, which has been built upon Dr. Aaron's work, but aimed towards those who feel called to be entrepreneurs, self-employed, once you take the assessment, you will discover if you are either somewhat of an HSE or you are a super HSE, or if you are like me and you are a super uber HSE. And then depending on where you fall, somewhat super or super uber, you will also receive a free HSE success guide, which is very comprehensive to support you with those first steps of what does this really mean and how do I want to begin to work with this, for myself, in my business, and in my life. And you can find all of that at www.hsequiz.com. And again, hsequiz.com.
Beautiful. Heather, thank you so much. It's been enlightening for me, and I'm sure for our listeners as well, in understanding themselves and potentially others that they're working with and saying, oh, maybe that's what the disconnect is between how I think and how they think. There might be some people looking at their spouse and going, oh, wait a second, you might want to take this assessment. So really, really great. Thank you so very much. And for our listeners, I always say that leaders of transformation take action, so take the quiz. If this resonates at all, you're thinking you might be somewhere on that scale, then take it, find out, it's a free quiz, you get the free guide, and then explore it from there. Because if you don't take action, nothing happens. We just continue on in the same way that we've always done, and we get the same results we've always gotten. So I encourage you that today. I look forward to hearing your stories. Go on leadersoftransformation.com. All the links, by the way, will be in the show notes, of course, for Heather if you're driving. So you can go there and access that. But leave us a comment. Let us know how this has resonated with you. If you have questions, feel free to leave us those questions. And again, if you enjoyed this, please leave us a rating review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts now. We really appreciate that. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.